I am thrilled to be co-opening this 3-day workshop today, the 28th and the 30th, on relations between NGOs, civil society, and states in times of COVID-19. Along with the Haifa Center for German and European Studies, the workshop sponsored by 2 additional research centers. Steffen will say a few words from the Haifa Center for German and European Studies. The second center is the National Knowledge and Research Center for Emergency Readiness. We have 90 researchers. It was established in January 2018 by the Israel Ministry of Science and Technology and the National Emergency Management Authority, NEMA, of the Ministry of Defense. The core institutions are the University of Haifa, the Technion, and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, together with researchers from Raphael, Rambam Hospital, Tel Chai College, the Israel School for Humanitarian Aid. We have partners from the municipality of Haifa and Natan International Humanitarian Aid. Basically, our mission is to provide a state-of-the-art scientific research institute to serve as a think tank for policy framers, decision makers, the academic community, and practitioners from all of the sectors. The center has 2 intertwined functions: independently generated, cutting-edge, and multidisciplinary research, and solicited real-time response. And COVID was certainly a test in that, to requests by NEMA, government ministries, elected officials, NGOs, and other stakeholders. The third center is the Minerva Center for the Rule of Law under Extreme Conditions, which is at the University of Haifa Faculty of Law and the Geography and Environmental Studies Department and the University of Hamburg. It's an international venue and transnational forum for study, research, training, education, and publication. Its mission focuses on the rule of law, broadly defined, to include policy and regulation, under 3 main types of extreme conditions: natural disasters, national security challenges, and socioeconomic crises. So this interdisciplinary workshop will examine if and how the unique challenges posed by the COVID-19 crisis have influenced relations between states and NGOs and other civil society actors. COVID certainly highlighted the myriad of roles these actors have in building more resilient societies during emergencies. This workshop will explore what lessons we might be able to apply to future emergencies, the differences among countries, I'm sure it'll be extremely interesting. The workshop's the brainchild of Dr. Omri Greenberg and Katerina Konarek, who've done a wonderful job of developing the workshop concept together with Dr. Michal Gal, and they've facilitated the implementation. So many thanks to the 3 of them and to all of you for participating. After Steffen gives a few words, we'll begin with the first of 2 sessions today, a roundtable on COVID-19 and NGOs, civil society, which will be chaired by Professor Michal Almog-Bar, who's the head of the Institute for the Study of Civil Society and Philanthropy in Israel at the School of Social Work and Social Welfare at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So Steffen, the floor is yours.
It's also my pleasure to welcome you all to this event that we are co-sponsoring. I'm very happy about that. I'm also very happy that our center is well represented here in these sessions. The Haifa Center for German and European Studies is very much interested in supranational and comparative topics. I think this conference is very important because the last 1.5 years create new situations, also new situations that will be ongoing into the future in some form or the other. And we are always very interested in these interactions between the local civil society, NGOs, the national and the international. So I'm very happy about this event, and we are very happy to co-sponsor it with the center that we anyway like so much, the Minerva Center at our university. So I hope you all enjoy the discussions, and I hope we will learn something that will be with us in the coming months and years and help us to better understand the new world that we are living in. Thanks so much.
Thank you everybody for the introduction and kicking off the conference. So without any further ado, we will hand over to our roundtable, and if we would be now all live physical together, I would call everyone up on the stage, but I will hand over now digitally to Michal Almog-Bar, who will be the chair of our roundtable. And we will have Steffen Hagemann, Sara Van Gunst, Daniella Seltzer, and Ahmad Sheikh Mohammed as our speakers.
Thank you, Kafrina. It's good to be here. Good afternoon. I hope you all have your coffee or tea with you to be with us in the next hour and a half. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have here. But I want to start also with a big thank you to Omri and Kafrina and Michal and all the organizers of this very timely and important event. The issue of civil society and its operation during crisis and its relation with the state during the crisis is of much interest all around the world these days. So I think we should have a very interesting discussion here in the today and in the following days, and it surely will continue afterwards. So in our roundtable today, we have 4 guests, and thank you for being with us, who will share with us some of their experiences during COVID. They're all representing different initiatives and organizations in civil society. And our panel will go like that. We will start by presenting each of the presenters. And after that, I will give some background, and then we will start our discussion. So why don't we start with Steffen? We can. Hi. Could you please introduce yourself and your organization?
Yeah, so my name is Steffen Hagemann. I'm head of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, a German political foundation connected to the Green Party, although we are an independent organization. Do you want to know more about us now? Okay.
No, that will do. Thank you. Now we'll go to Sara. Sarah from Kavloved.
Sure. Hi, my name is Sara. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Okay,
very well.
Great. I'm representing Kavloved, or the Workers' Hotline in English. We're a small grassroots organization that protects the rights of workers here in Israel, based on also the enforcement of Israeli labor law, which is universal and protects workers regardless of religion, nationality, legal status, or gender. We've been around, actually this year marks our 30th anniversary, so we've been at this for quite some time.
Okay. Thank you. Daniella?
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. I'm talking from Jerusalem, and I founded 2.5 years ago with a bunch of colleagues the Jerusalem Food Rescuers. We work at the wholesale market in Jerusalem, and we work to create a more sustainable urban food system. And the way we do this is by taking food that would have otherwise been discarded and doing with it different activities. And this past Thursday, we launched a food justice center here in the wholesale market. And I won't go too much into detail now and maybe expand later, but I'll just say that in the first year of our work, our organization was very much related to consciousness raising around food security and food justice. And then during COVID, our organization focused much more on food security and thinking about food resilience as a more sustainable solution.
Thank you. And now we have Ahmad. Are you here with us?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you. I'm Ahmad Sheikh, General Manager at the Galilee Society. It has to be mentioned here that the Galilee Society includes different centers. First, the Environment Justice Center, the Health Rights Center, Socioeconomic Research Center, Institute for Applied Research, R&D, and Science Education Center.
So it's great that we have 4 very different organizations / initiatives from different subjects and different facets and even different countries. And I think we will be able to discuss the variety of responses and challenges that these organizations faced during the COVID-19 crisis. But I want to start with some very, going to be very short background about the world of NGOs or civil society during the COVID-19 crisis. I guess it will not surprise any of you if I will say that NGOs were hit very hard all around the world during the COVID-19 crisis. We have data from many different countries showing that. I will focus on what we know from Israel, since I'm living here and researching Israel. But what I'm going to say is, well, is very similar to what we've seen in civil society in other places. To start with, when we say civil society, we usually look at a sphere. We do not look at organizations. We look at the sphere which is not the state, which is not the market, but it's just in between. And we have there many different kind of organizations and associations and citizens and initiatives and volunteers, all there for a purpose of influencing the public good. So this is the sphere that we are looking on, but usually it is much easier to count the association, the organization, what we in Hebrew would call amutot, and in other languages it will be NGOs or association. In Israel, we have 20,000 registered associations. This is a very high number in comparative terms. Every year we have new 1,700 associations registering. This is a very high number, again, in comparative terms. But also, if we're looking at other countries in the last 10 years or so, we see a rise in the number of associations registered in very different countries. So civil society and especially associations are on the rise all around the world, in the Western world and in other parts of the world. This is not only a pattern of the Western world. We also see it in the global South and other places. Why is that? I'm sure you all have heard a lot about it, but we're talking about processes within states, privatizations, of course, and other processes. So when we look on this group of association during COVID-19 in Israel, these 20,000 organizations or so, which, by the way, provide most of social services in Israel nowadays that we as citizens get from our state, we see, and I'm talking on the most recent survey that was conducted only about 2 months ago. And what we see is that about 60% of the organizations reported that their activities or operation were severely hit by the pandemic. This is a very large number, 60% of the organizations. 60% of the organizations also reported a decrease in donation during COVID. And we're talking about the year alone, okay, of COVID. We also see that 40% of the organizations reported a rise in the demand for their services, which means that they needed to supply more services with less funding, okay, which were, of course, much harder. We also see that at least in Israel, the lack of approval of governmental budget, okay, was severely affected about 60% of the association. Again, especially those who are relying on government for their activity. Most of the organization reported that they did not receive any kind of funding or support from government during COVID-19, whether it's Arab association or association within the Jewish population. All of them, or very few, received any kind of funding or support. 80% of the organization needed to lay off employees. Okay, we're talking about organization that went through very severe organizational changes during this crisis. And 16% of the organization said that they are not likely to continue exist at the end of this year, okay, which means that they will be closed. And this is quite similar to what we've seen in the United States and in many places in Europe, a group of organizations that is not going to survive this crisis. When we look about the government here in Israel and the relationship between civil society organizations and government during the COVID crisis, we see that government support arrived very lately and in a very small amount in comparison to other countries, especially, again, US and Europe, okay? To this date, we are talking about something like 150 million shekels that were allocated as a support for NGOs, as government supporters to NGOs in Israel, but very, very few of these allocations made their ways to nonprofits. Bureaucracy is very high, and most of these allocations are also going to veteran, established organization, and none of it is going to the more small and newer organizations of civil society. We also have seen a lot of lack of transparency in the operation of government during COVID-19. Many organizations complained about the fact that they wanted to get information from government about the services that they provide and about needs, and they found it very hard to get any kind of information from government. We'll probably hear more about it soon. At the same time, talking about civil society, we've seen a rise sharp in volunteers during the COVID-19 crisis. Most of them were new to volunteering. Most of them were young, as old people could not volunteer or could volunteer in less amount. Just an anecdote, 7 million food deliveries were done during the first 6 months of the crisis, of the COVID-19 crisis, all of them delivered by volunteers, not by government or not by municipalities, not by the IDF or any other state institution. We also have seen more than 500 new social innovation and entrepreneurships that were not before the crisis. And it's going to be very interesting to follow this initiative and see if and how they will survive after COVID. And we did not see many cross-sector partnerships during COVID between government and NGOs and, of course, the business sector, but we did see one very interesting cross-sector partnership around volunteering and around the management of volunteering all around the countries, which included the IDF home front, several government ministries, 47 volunteer organizations from the Arab Society and the Jewish Society, and municipalities. And this cross-sector partnership actually activated most of the volunteers during this crisis, and it was, say the least, pretty successful. But at the same time, there were many other initiatives and trials to form other cross-sector collaboration and partnership, which did not succeed, unfortunately. So this was a very short background for our discussion today. And what I want to do next is present a few questions for our presenter today. And I would be very happy if all of you or any of you would be happy to take these questions and respond. And my first question would be, how did the COVID-19 pandemic affected your organization? what were the major changes made? What were the major challenges that you had to face? Okay, Ahmad.
The Galilee Society has had two missions. One was internal and the other was external social. The first was required with the progress of the first wave of the epidemic, a decision to continue working in full capacity to not send any worker to unpaid leave, recognize and adapt to working from home, and to still show to the laboratories, if it is possible according to public health directives, and so on. The second mission as an organization that promotes social and economic justice was to evaluate our role in promoting a solution for the Arab society in dealing with the epidemic. From the very beginning, we realized significant shortcomings that stood out in the way the state treated to the epidemic and its attitude towards the Arab society. Things like lack of basic information and vital information about the pandemic in Arabic, in addition to lack of tests in the Arab localities and more. The Galilee Society then mobilized and looked mandate action beyond publishing and translating vital public health expertise instead to activate of the National Health Committee in the High Arab Monitoring Committee, and began formatting an action plan with the heads of the Arab Local Authorities Committee and other civil society leadership that lead to the established of the Arab Situation Room. The Situation Room operated from within in the Galilee Society. The General Director of the GS Rikaz staff, the Social Research Center, and all of the organization support team were recruited almost fully to support the Situation Room work. While most of the significant research activity was almost unaffected. The financial effect of the organization were mild and were felt almost a year after the outbreak. For example, the support of the Ministry of Science and Technology was reduced due to the corona crisis and delay in approving the state budget. The combination of the two issues, the political instabilities and the epidemic, create quite a bit on certainty to not just financially, but also in terms of promoting social plan. For example, over 2 years, we have been working on promoting a national health plan to reduce disparities from the Arab society after a process that began in 2017 and formatting a plan together with the Ministry of Health. It was halted to the reaction of the pandemic.
Thank you. Sarah, how did the pandemic found Kav LaOved?
Sure. It was actually interesting to hear your introduction because I was sort of nodding at all the different areas that you you covered. So first, maybe I'll just explain a couple minutes kind of how Kav LaOved works, because I think that will help explain a little bit more how we were affected. And I don't know actually if I need to do the slides, so it's okay. I think we can do without that. So at Kav LaOved, we work with a broad range of largely vulnerable and marginalized workers in the Israeli labor market. We're working with migrant workers, largely in caregiving and agriculture, but also in industry, in construction, We're working with refugees and asylum seekers. We're working with Palestinians from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we're working with low-income Israelis, which encompasses a broad array of different populations, to include Palestinian Israeli citizens, new Jewish immigrants coming to Israel or newly arrived to Israel. We're working also with Ethiopian Israelis, with the Haredi community, and basically any worker who is earning 6,100 shekels a month or less. So you can see right away that the population that we're working with is really that population that was quite affected during the COVID crisis. We also work on two levels at Kablon Fed to promote change. One, we provide direct assistance and information sharing on workers' rights at the grassroots level. And we really, in general, each year have a very high volume of workers that we're receiving. We get around 30,000 requests for assistance, on a normal year, opening 5,000 cases and returning 31 million shekels in owed wages and benefits, and up to 40 million shekels. So even under regular times, we're quite busy. Based on this kind of bird's eye view of our grassroots work, we really have a good understanding of the trends that are emerging in labor rights violations in the labor market. And monitoring that and evaluating that drives our policy level work, where we're doing policy advocacy to promote systemic change in the legal regulatory framework of the overarching labor market. So looking at legal petitions, presenting in Knesset, working with key stakeholders to enact broad-reaching changes that affect the population as a whole. And I would say that under the COVID pandemic, it wasn't necessarily that our role changed as much, is that there was a greater demand at both levels of how we work and across all populations that we were working with. So right away, we noticed an increase in demand for services, for explanations, especially for information, especially amongst marginalized communities that had language barriers or had difficulty accessing online websites the government had made available, or the government maybe was slow to translate new information about the COVID pandemic, say in Thai or in Russian, different languages that Kablon is working in. And I should say we work across, as a general rule, 7 different languages through our volunteers and through our staff. At the same time that we noticed a huge demand for our services, we also, as you alluded to in your presentation, had a lot of challenges as an organization. One was financial. Just as the crisis was starting to unfold, we learned that a grant that we had been getting from the Ministry of Labor for over a decade was unexpectedly going to be cut. Not just reduced, but we weren't going to get the money at all. As you discussed, there wasn't, we didn't know that was going to happen. There wasn't a lot of conversation around this, so that came as a surprise to us. And that grant specifically goes to fund our hotline services. So exactly at the moment where we needed that support the most, we lost a key grant, which we had gotten for the last 10 years. At the same time, we had to shift all of our services, our individual service, from an in-person format to an online format. So normally if you come to Kablon Fed in the day where we're doing direct assistance, you can't walk from one side of the office to the other because it's full of people coming with pay slips, people coming with questions about a problem they're having with their employer, where they sit down with the Kablon Fed staff member or volunteer, get some help, advocacy with their employer, or possibly even legal help if they need it. And we're also, of course, dealing with a vulnerable population that doesn't have access to technology always, and it's coming from locations, say in agriculture, where they have a very difficult time finding space even to reach us. So suddenly we had to shift all of our stuff overnight online, which was a big challenge. Because we moved all of our services online, we were unable to collect the dues that we normally would collect from workers who come for our services. So we normally collect very modest fees for workers who come in person and get help. And that's about a quarter of our budget, and suddenly that was just gone because people, like migrant workers and a lot of populations, weren't able to make those payments online. They didn't have a way to do it. And it took us a while to kind of get that up and running. Another way that we were affected is staffing because of the financial cuts, and it took us a while to kind of reorient and do fundraising, which we did. We were able to do, and to stabilize, we had a month where we had to put a lot of staff members on furlough. And it wasn't entirely because of the COVID crisis, but it definitely contributed. We ended up closing our office in Nazareth, which had been open for a number of years. So we had staffing challenges, and people were trying to work from home with kids and, on furlough, balancing their own pressures and facing increased pressures from workers who were also, panicked, trying to understand their situation. So it was a lot of stress on workers. At the same time, Kavloved has a very strong base of volunteers. We're a small organization. We have 20 staff. And by the volume of calls that I mentioned, you can understand that there's a lot of work that's being done. And so we used to have close to 100 volunteers that are really integrated into all of our services, especially our direct services. And a lot of them were retired or older persons and weren't able to come into the office anymore, weren't able to continue volunteering because of the challenges of technology and so on. So we lost actually quite a significant portion of our volunteers. And our refugee program, for example, we lost half our volunteers. So in the middle of all of this, we were trying to scramble to find others who could fill in, that we could train to try to meet the needs. And I would say in general, I mean, it was a strength of Kavloved, but it was also a challenge that we had to operate on two fronts. One, we're getting a lot of information from all sectors about the different problems that workers are facing, and in real time, we're having to kind of take a look at that, analyze that, and understand how should we focus our policy work to be most effective and to help the broadest array of people. And we're working with a lot of populations who didn't have access to the safety net. Refugees and asylum seekers, for example, weren't eligible for state safety net programs. Palestinian workers coming in who were employed in construction, who were maybe laid off, didn't have access to safety net programs. So there were a lot of challenges at the policy level. How can we address these very real problems? And so many of them at one time to help people in the best way possible. So I would say those are the main areas that we were struggling with at the time.
Oh, thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
Daniella, what were the major challenges, or how did the COVID pandemic affected your initiative?
Yes, so I think that because we worked around food and food security, we definitely had challenges, but we also had a lot of opportunities. This was an opportunity for our organization to also prosper. So if before COVID, our organization was very much focused on raising awareness around consumerism and about capitalism and how that affects climate change, and about food waste and food justice through different community meals that we did from rescued food or from working with schools, informal education and also informal education. Corona flipped all of our cards. Beforehand, we were very much community organized and doing a lot of community activities and lectures and workshops, etc. And during COVID in the beginning, nothing that we did had any meaning during this time. And we had access to a mountain of gold, which is a lot of surplus food here in the wholesale market. So every day there's around between 8 to 12 tons of food that is thrown out. Which is a lot of food. And during this time when there are so many and were so many people who had their jobs cut and populations already in the social periphery who were further marginalized, what we decided to focus on was around food security. So we started to come to the wholesale market 3 to 4 times a week with between 10 to 20 volunteers. And we'd go around the market and ask the vendors if they had food that they would throw away. And again, I'm talking not about Machne Yehuda market. I'm talking about the wholesale market. If you know it, it's in Givat Shaul, which is in the peripheries of Jerusalem. And we started to rescue between 4 to 7 tons of food every single week. A lot of us came from activist circles, so we were connected to different communities in Jerusalem, and we slowly developed, rapidly, within 3 weeks, we developed a network of giving out food to community leaders. So we contacted the neighborhood council in Isawiya and religious leader in a mosque in Jabal Mukaber, and the asylum seeker organization in Jerusalem, Jack, and a bunch of other organizations, and people from residents from different communities that we knew here in Jerusalem, like a network of ultra-Orthodox single mothers or divorced Haredi mothers. And they came to the market and took this food, and each of the different community leaders that we worked with created their own inner network of giving out the food. So in some places it was putting it out at the mosque, in another place it was a produce stand, in another place it was giving out the food to people's homes. So from being, within 1 month, being a community organization that works around education and changing consumption habits, we became a band-aid in our society of giving out, doing immediate relief work, which is not something that we ever wanted to do, because we were very curious to work around sustainability and also social sustainability. So we had this major change in plans, and for a few months during the first COVID wave, we gave out 1,000 produce boxes, around 8 kilos of produce box to each family in Jerusalem, and to Bedouin communities, and a little bit outside of Jerusalem. And this was what felt like doing what we felt that the government should be giving out or supporting, because we also knew from the people that we were giving out the food that what they got was either mainly unhealthy food, like white flour, canned food, or prepared food. So what it felt like we were giving out the healthy food that the government was supposed to be giving out, and at the very least to complement what was being given out by the welfare department of the city. I think that for us it was a blossoming period. If before Corona, our organization was very much the people who were holding it were people in their 20s and 30s from West Jerusalem. The change in our focus and thinking about food security and connecting food waste, or food that would have otherwise gone to waste, and food resilience, and thinking about how to give out food, it brought a lot of people who we never had worked with before around these subjects. And it allowed us to do these really interesting connections. So thinking about people from East Jerusalem and asylum seekers and Haredi mothers. And because of this urgent time, I think it allowed a different conversation to happen between all of us. And it really expanded the people who were involved and also the focus. So now the conversations between us are about thinking of how to give out food, but it's also about how to create engaged citizens. Just today, before I joined you, we had a meeting with all of the community leaders who take food to their communities, and there were different people coming from the different communities. and we were talking about how do we continue to engage the people who receive the food? How do we make sure that they are also participating with us in changing the urban food landscape in Jerusalem? And I'll say one last thing. It was, I think that this major mivtza, this operation, was able to happen because there were so many volunteers and people who didn't have work who were able to join our operation. So think around 60 people coming every week to the market in different times to pick the food, and then people also in the neighborhoods came to take the food, and then in the neighborhoods to give out the food. Michal, you were talking about all these people who handed out the 7 million food plates. And now what's happening is a different story. Now that everyone is going back to work and schools are starting, now we are needing to rethink how our work is going to continue going from now on. It's definitely been some challenge.
Thank you, Daniella. Now to Steffen. How did COVID find your foundation, and what were the challenges you faced?
Well, I have to say that we had a very privileged position because we are funded by the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and this is a very secure funding even in a crisis like the COVID pandemic. So we did not have to fight with a decrease in our budget. Nevertheless, our funding is project funding linked to specific project results that could not be achieved in this current situation. And we also in Germany advocated for flexible adjustments with regard to project duration, to personnel costs, to project funds for existing grant agreements. But unfortunately, the German bureaucracy was even in such a situation not flexible. And so we had to work with the regular regulations, which made our work difficult and which also was a barrier to support our partner organizations here in Israel. I mean, we did invest a lot in the digitalization of our work, and that will have a lasting impact on the way we work. The Heinrich-Böll Foundation is an organization with offices in 32 countries. So we're really an international network, and that was a positive effect of this pandemic, that this international, transnational cooperation really improved. And this was also a kind of a mission of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation to bring these perspectives in the pandemic together to the discourses in all countries we work in, because it was very much in Germany, but also here it was very much focused on the nation state. And we wanted to broaden the perspectives, bring perspectives from the North and the global South together. And this is a strength of our foundation, also really stressing the need for international cooperation. We saw that in research, for example, that research on COVID-19 was made available worldwide, and that helped also progress in finding the vaccine and battling the infection. But if we look at the vaccination campaigns now, we very much see a vaccination egoism all over the world. And what we see with the COVAX initiative of providing vaccinations worldwide, that clearly is not enough. So like to broaden the scope of solidarity, this definitely is something that we want to achieve in this crisis. Here in Israel, we work together with our partner organizations, and we really tried to support them as much as we can. And the problem of many organizations is that they don't have a really sustainable infrastructure, which can persist over time. And this is also a challenge for us to provide such an infrastructure, but we try to help as much as we can in support in adapting to the Corona guidelines, in support to build up a digital infrastructure of our partner organizations. And Sarah, we work with a hotline for migrants and refugees, so it's a very organization which has a similar structure that you have, also providing direct services, counseling and information, but also working on the policy level. And as a political foundation, we very much work on this policy level to bring about systemic change. So the hotline, for example, worked to achieve that everyone, regardless of the legal status with a COVID infection, will get full health treatment, that the deposit funds will be released, things like that on a systemic level. And I think DEBORAH in her introduction used the word resilience, right? And this is a term that is very much used. It's a term that is also used in the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. And maybe we can speak later a little bit about our understanding of this term, because from my perspective, it's very important that we don't speak only about like coping activities in a crisis situation and adaptation then, but also you can understand resilience also as a transformative concept. And this is really, I think, what we have to talk about. What are the lessons we have to learn in addressing this crisis, but all the crises we have to deal with, and how do we have to transform our societies to create more resilient societies? And this is a topic that we started discussing in the foundation, also making use of this international network and bringing together local, national, international experiences from all over the world.
Okay, thank you. And we will touch upon the question of resilience very soon. So thank you for bringing it up. We have a question for all of you here at the chat, and a specific question for Ahmad, and maybe Abir could also respond. I know she's here. The question was a stop in government money due to the lack of government? This is a question for everybody. Sarah, you may want to pick it up.
Sure, yeah. In the situation with our Ministry of Labor grant, it was because there was no budget, and so there wasn't funding to be, I mean, funds were allocated in some way, so there was a certain prioritization, I guess, but yeah, that was the reason that we understood that we didn't get the grant.
Okay, thank you. Ahmad or Abir, do you want to take the other questions, which is in the chat? I'll read it out. According to your opinion, a crisis in result of COVID-19 pandemic did it support in any form the increasing of cooperation between Jews and Arab medicine workers and healthcare authorities of the two sectors?
I don't plan to answer this question. I think I plan to share our experience, our model, okay, how we deal with the pandemic, and to say something about the needs of the Arab community. I think the other colleague here described we deal with the pandemic in other ways. It's mean if you give me that I can share with you my presentation which I prepared, it will be good to describe our model, how we deal with this pandemic crisis. I can say in short term, we propose to create a body that will provide a consolidated and coordinated response to the demand of the Arab local authorities. We deal with local authorities. We see that the local authorities in each locality, each city is the body which we can deal with, and over this channel, we can know about the needs of the community. And so we can move this need to the government and to the ministry. In other way, in the long term, our goal was to raise preparing this level of resilience in the Arab society in Israel in face for any future emergency crisis. You talk about the climate change crisis, which will in the future will happen. We deal in other way with the problem. Everyone knows that the Arab society is not included in decision-making platform in general in Israel. And the Arab society is not part of Israeli crisis management platform. So we try to build something that can deal with this situation, discrimination and inequality in various aspects, lack of available information in Arabic, mobile testing, accommodation for patients. All of these thematic we deal with in the, I call the emergency, Arab emergency room. After this, we have a theory to change. If the national and local leadership, the civil society organization, and the local authorities work together in multi-sectoral coordinated framework of action, then the Arab society will be able to deal with the coronavirus crisis professionally and out of the shared responsibility. So I think we need to talk not about our doing especially for one fields, to look in global how we deal with this problem, what we need to make in level of structure of NGOs, and how we can continue to work after this crisis, not to go deeply in some field and to say what we do in these fields. We do different things. I cannot explain all these things, what we do, but I think we need to talk about systematic change in the cooperation and in the relation between state and the Arab society here in Israel. You say the health, 20% of the health staff which work in the health area are in Arab. They are involved 100% in doing something in the crisis. After this, we have another situation. You see what's happening in Israel last month only. It's changed quickly. I think everyone feel that the Arab society want to deal, to put something for the community in Israel community in all Arab and Jewish. And after 1 week or 2 weeks after, we have another situation here. We need to talk about these changes in the community, in the many things. That it's not only to talk about deeply food security. We deal with food security. We deal with information. We deal with test. We deal with accommodation. Different things, but we need to talk more wide in these things.
Thank you, Ahmed. And I
sorry.
also want to thank SHMUELI Yerushalmi for asking this question, this important question. And I think both of you, Steffen and Ahmed, referred to the lessons that we need to learn in order to form a better sustaining civil society, a more vibrant civil society, a more resilient civil society. Oh, Abir wanted to say something. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you, Abir.
No, it's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to emphasize something. Actually, I have nothing to add to what Ahmed said because it's very broad and it really touches on everything. But the thing is, sometimes we forget that we need to look at the Arab society in Israel differently. We cannot just keep comparing like it's all equal in every aspect, and then it's only this point that's different. There are 100 points that can be discussed that are different for for Arabs and Jews. So just as Ahmad said, in the beginning of with the outbreak of coronavirus in Israel, for example, no information was published in Arabic. Everything was in Hebrew. There was the language barrier that was already mentioned from other speakers as well. In addition, there were no testing stations, places for Arabs in Arab cities or small villages where, most of us are, let's say, in the north. So you have few testing places, and not everyone actually have the ability to go to that place. There are several things also with what Ahmad said about the accommodation for patients, those who were supposed to be in quarantine, who were in touch, for example, with a patient or something. Some, not actually some, there's a significant percentage of Arabs who are traditional, who are conservative, who cannot, be left in a place with people from the other sex, for example. So there are many things that weren't taken into consideration. So just to talk about it, it's just something on the side doesn't seem right to me, if you know what I mean. It has a bit more deep points that were first supposed to be addressed before we talk about any other thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Abir. So I think this all takes us to the next question, which looks about relationship, okay? The relationship between the organizations in civil society and the initiative in civil society and the state. And when we say state, of course, we mean all kind of state institutions. It could be municipalities, local government. It could be all kind of institutions that belong to the state. And I want to ask you all presenters about the lesson learned about your relations and working with the state. Again, what was the major challenges? What can we learn and take up with us in order to make civil society, whether it's in the Arab society or in other organizations, more resilient and perhaps stronger?
To begin?
Yes, please, Ahmad.
In the Galilee Society has extensive interaction and cooperation with the Arab local authorities. I say all the time, I talk about Arab local authorities. It's the body which can deal with and cooperate with. Some government ministries and institutes before the pandemic. Yet, through the work of the situation room, which we built here in the Galilee Society, we had to work for the first time with institutions such as Home Front Command, Picud Aoref. That was new for us, and we tried to work with this body while the relation with the health ministry were strengthened over the time. To mention, at the first, the state worked in total uncertainty, and seemed to give more space and cooperate with the Arab civil society. Yet, by the time it got organized better, I mean the state, and it withdraw itself and its different institution for cooperating with the Arab civil society. It's changed over the time from the first wave to the second wave and the third wave.
Okay, thank you. And what do you think, Ahmed, the lessons that we can take to improve the situation, to help Arab civil society with its relation with government, or how government can help Arab civil society? What should it do? Sorry.
I talk about the theory of change, which we deal with, and we have three premises. The first one, combining the efforts of civil society organization operating in various areas, will result the most effective use of existing social assets. The second one, multi-sectoral cooperation of national and local leadership with civil society on the ground will result in an accurate identification of Arab society's need and concerted and tailored response in time of crisis. And the last one, the collaboration of national, local, and civil society leader with government ministries will result in the development of a coordinated policy to help deal with the COVID-19 crisis more efficiently.
Okay, thank you very much. Sara?
Sure. I would say I actually asked the director of Kavloved and the employer their thoughts too. Like, did our relationship with the state change during the crisis? How did they see it? And we talked together, and we felt that actually our role with the state didn't change so much. It more like highlighted sort of existing relationship that we have with the state and maybe intensified things in a certain way. And I think at Kavloved we are always struggling with a bit of a tension, which is true for, I think, a lot of NGOs and social change organizations. On the one hand, we're a critic of the state, right? We're pointing out gaps in policy. We're pushing for areas of change. We're highlighting things that we think need to be done differently. We're operating through the legal system to challenge government policies. On the other hand, we're also collaborating very closely, especially on an individual level, with members of different ministries to protect the rights of workers. And so we're actually partnering in some ways. And I think there's always a challenge within the organization and kind of our role. I mean, first and foremost, we're a political organization. We promote change, but there's always a tension, I think, in managing those two roles that we have and the two hats that we put on. And I think one of the challenges that is ongoing in our work, but certainly also came out during the COVID crisis, is, and it's something that Ahmad also referred to, kind of how do you have a more systematic way of kind of collaborating and working with the government? And it's a tension within our work as well. I mean, Kavloved could be open 24/7, 7 days a week, and we still wouldn't be able to help all the workers with labor rights violations. And you can get caught in that. You can caught like this kind of hamster in a wheel, like with all the different individual cases of workers and challenges that they're facing. And there's a real need because there aren't other places for these workers to go, for language barriers, for monetary reasons, for a whole host of reasons. Kavloved is the place they can go. So there's a pressure on our side to deal with the people who are coming into our office. On the other hand, if we get stuck in that, then these problems continue. So we need to find a balance in how much staff and financial resources. We also dedicate to the policy side of our work, where you can really promote systemic level change, where you deal with a lot of the individual cases that are coming through your door, but that work takes longer. It's more complex. It's a slower moving process. I think a good example of that is our work on the deposit law, where we had a petition to change the deposit law for 3 years, and it took a long time. But at the end of the day, right in the launch of the COVID crisis, we were able to cancel the government's requirement that 20% of refugee salaries were taken from them and held in a deposit fund that they can't access unless they leave the country. That was very timely for people. It was a social safety net. They suddenly got all that money back. Not everybody, but at least there was some access to some safety net that people had at the height of the COVID crisis, which really was very impactful. So I think as a result of, it's been a dialogue at Kavloved, but I think maybe the COVID crisis heightened it, where we've started to place more emphasis on the policy side of our work, because we realize that there's a lot of opportunities for change and really promoting more kind of systematic solutions to a lot of these problems. And I think I would also say that we've also been focusing a lot more on issues of enforcement and on directing policy change to the fact that the government, by and large, lacks a systematic approach to addressing enforcement of labor rights in Israel. And without a systematic approach, that means like organizations like Kavloved get stuck in this wheel of, issuing, lots of complaints that that in the end don't really make a big difference, but it's hard to know how to engage. What are the ways of engaging? Like what information is the state collecting on enforcement? What are the enforcement efforts that they are doing? How can we contribute to that? And that's been a real focus of our work moving forward, is to promote a more systematic approach to enforcement of labor rights in Israel by the state, so that civil society and the state can actually collaborate better together and create, lasting change and change that will really benefit workers, especially in the informal sector, that are really unprotected with, lack of unionization and a whole host of other issues.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Daniella, I know that your organization has not much interaction, or did not have much interaction during COVID with state institutions, but I do want to ask you, what kind of interaction or what kind of policy do you think would help to initiatives like yours to flourish and to be sustainable?
So we actually did have contact with the Office for Community Advancement, the government Office for Community Advancement, and they weren't able, they wanted to support us, but they said that because of the government situation in the last year, all funding is frozen. So that was unfortunate for us, and that connection slowly disappeared, but we hope to continue. And also with the municipality, as the amount of food that we sent out and the amount of volunteers grew, we felt that we need more resources to make this work happen. I didn't mention before, but we, up until a few months ago, were a completely volunteer organization. And no one got funding for their work, even though some of us completely dropped our master's degrees, work, etc., to do this work. So we reached out to the municipality to get funding for us to increase our capacities and to have someone who will be hired to be a volunteer coordinator and to coordinate this giving out of food. And the mayor came a few times and we had a bunch of conversations. And again, because of the situation with the government, everything was just stuck for, I think now for 7-8 months. That there was an interest to support us, but the funding didn't come in. It felt that in terms of we wanted to also think in collaboration with the municipality of how can we give out food in a more sustainable way and in a way that doesn't continue to enforce this neediness cycle where people end up just getting food, right? And thinking of a different type of model where the people who get the food are also involved in this food network. So we started to create this pilot program of produce stands in the city, in the different neighborhoods where residents were in charge of coming to the market, taking the food, bringing it back, and doing other types of work around food in the neighborhood, like community garden, encouraging community gardens and compost and workshops around food fermentation, etc., etc. And there was no interest at that time, around a year ago. There was no interest to support this new type of model of how can we think of food, shifting away from food security, from making ends meet, to thinking about a more sustainable mechanism and programs that don't just give out food, but also give people tools to have more food security and to have more nutritious food at home. And I feel that now there's more interest in this, a little more interest in supporting this type of thinking. And I think that COVID all over the world has just proven how much food is at the forefront of of society, and how important it is to think about are we importing food from abroad, or where is all of our food coming from? What about local food? How do we think about people's access to food? And I think that during this time, it was really prevalent for us that also, who the municipality was supporting the least. The different communities we were working with were the communities that got the least support from the government. I'm talking about East Jerusalem, asylum seekers, Bedouins. So that was very, very felt for us. We did work with the Minhalim Kilatim, which are the community centers in Jerusalem. It's a model, I think it doesn't exist in the same way in other cities in Israel, but it's kind of like a middle point between the municipality and residents, and they help bring information and from the municipality down to residents, and from the residents back up to the municipality. And I think that from our side, COVID really stressed the importance of these community centers, because while the municipality might not have had a lot of the answers initially as to how to respond to problems on the ground, it was these community centers that were able to respond to the ground. They were the ones who were the most in contact with residents. Yeah.
Thank you. Stefan, I do want to ask you from a comparative perspective, okay? You are part of a transnational organization, as you said, a foundation. And do you see a policy or policies which are more supportive towards civil society, which you could screen, or you could say that will make it more sustainable, that perhaps support its infrastructures? That's the first question. And the other one, because I like you so much, so you have two questions, is so what kind of policy would you recommend, whether it's the Israel or Germany, what kind of policy would you recommend from your experience that would boost civil society, that could help the more marginalized populations within civil society?
Yeah, I mean, in relations between civil society and state, you could see very globally very different patterns, right? So if you speak about ideal types, you had authoritarian states who prevented the participation of civil society in a response to social challenges.
I meant during COVID, sorry.
Yes, during COVID, of course. You saw that, that these established patterns did not change during COVID, although there was a need, right, to address the problems of the COVID pandemic. That did not lead authoritarian states to give civil society a more prominent role. And you saw also other states, also in Hungary, for example, where you see an increasing concentration of power and governments who try to take advantage of this emergency to eliminate democratic control, and also to limit especially this confrontational functions of civil society, or adversarial functions of civil society. And then you had also, I think, a quite interesting, also a problematic pattern where you can see a blurring of the boundaries between government and civil society. You could see that in the United Kingdom, for example, where the state shifted responsibility in the social sphere to civil society. So there were groups of people who really had been left to civil society organizations, and the state was presenting that as though these were government services. So that was also this is a very problematic pattern as well. And it's also like a top-down manner. It did not give civil society really a voice in formulating the policies. And so the whole program was not developed in partnership, but the role of civil society was to execute. And this is also not a very good pattern. But then you have, also, especially on the local level, I think a really multi-level cross-sectoral cooperation also, where civil society was empowered to really participate in the process to design a policy addressing different issues of the COVID pandemic, giving civil society really in voice. And this is a model that should be strengthened. And that can be quite successful. Or an example on a national level in Germany is the Corona app, which was also a cooperation between the state, between tech companies, but also between NGOs, who very much worked that this app will safeguard privacy rights, data rights, and all that. And that was quite a successful cooperation, which in the end contributed to trust into this Corona warning app in Germany. Then a lot of mistakes were made, so it's not really a success at the moment. But I think at the beginning this was quite a successful process where civil society was part from the initial stage in the process and had a voice in this process designing this Corona app, and I think that could be a successful model.
Thank you. Okay, we do have some more time, right, Kafrina? Okay. I do want to ask you about something that Ahmed did mention before, but I think it's worth more elaboration about network of cooperations within civil society and perhaps with some governmental agents, not necessarily. How did you find these networks of cooperation? Did it help you during COVID? What are the lessons to be learned, or how should we encourage such a cooperation? As I said before, we have many different actors in Israeli civil society, and civil society also broadly defined in other places. How can we make civil society agents to be more cooperative with each other?
Look, by establishing the situation room, more than 11 NGOs, Arab NGOs, and grassroots organizations from the Arab society participated in the work. The GS relation with them got stronger. I want to say something about our models. We split the inquiries which we get from the local authorities in different committees. I begin with individual care, to give answer for the individual care. We talk about Negev and next cities. We have another committee for food security, another committee for health issues, another committee deal with local authorities and their needs. We have a committee for education and committee for information, and something for employment and business. And we build a committee for emergency committees in the local area. So each one of the NGOs which take part on our model was responsible for one committee. And around these NGOs, we build another network, another crisis from other NGOs, local NGOs, which deal with this issue. So our model, it's began in the Galilee Society, collect question and needs from the local authorities, building a committees, different committees, and involve each NGO in each committee, and this NGO and this committee build another crisis around to deal with these issues. That's our model, working model. It's, I don't know to say Palestinians or Arab labs here in Israel or another thing, but it's our working model.
Okay, and this model, which seemed to work very well during the crisis, do you think it will be sustainable after COVID, after the crisis?
Yeah, that's our matter to continue to deal with this model. It's sure you need to change the committees according to the issues, to the big issues. Now we deal with the crisis, COVID-19 crisis, and the next time we deal with climate change and another crisis in that. So we need the same model. We can copy this model and make adjustment on this model and deal with other issues which will, I don't hope that will happen, but we say that it's coming. It's coming. The next 10 years, we have a big issues here in Israel and in the world dealing with climate change issues.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts about networks of cooperation within civil society?
Yeah. This is our work has mainly developed in the last year, since the beginning of a year and a half since COVID started. And we were working a lot with, as I mentioned before, Minhalim Kilatim, which are these community centers in Jerusalem, and a bunch of other organizations. What I feel, both in our work, but also in general, what I noticed in Jerusalem is that there's a lot of new inter-organizational collaboration and thinking groups. Just to name a few, there's the Jerusalem Lobby that developed also before COVID, but I feel that COVID really strengthened these ties. There were a bunch of meetings of the lobby and a bunch of working groups around climate change, food security, renewable energy, and a bunch of other topics. And these different working groups have their now offshoots and cross collaboration between different NGOs in Jerusalem. There's also the climate change. There was a climate change conference also in the last few months here in Jerusalem and all of the Judean area in Matei Yehuda. And also within the municipality, there is a new food security forum, also with residents of Jerusalem. So I feel that there is a lot more collaborations happening at least in Jerusalem around these topics and between different NGOs. And it's really exciting because I think it's allowing a lot more programs to different intersectorial work to be done, but also opportunities to find meeting points to also address the municipality and create a stronger voice to create change in the city. Okay. What is missing, in my view, at least, is and again, I'm very much talking about food. That's our work. So I'm sticking to it. But what is missing for me is to create a broader conversation between food groups in Israel in general, like a thinking group. Or a round table, whether it's food around sustainability, climate change, food banks, and to create some sort of thinking group of how we can advance this in general, farming, food access. So we're now slowly working to create some sort of mini conference in the end of this year, at least in Jerusalem, to address these needs.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add, it's the other two speakers just mentioned, I think the COVID crisis really did highlight the importance of collaboration across the NGOs and the NGO sector. And at Kavlovet, I think we saw that happening at two levels. One, there was a lot of collaboration going on in terms of advocacy work. Kavlovet, has collaboration with a lot of NGOs, but I think the COVID crisis heightened the importance of adding a lot of voices together to call for very specific changes, like protecting the rights of women around maternity leave and things like that during the COVID crisis. We really saw the importance of joining on coalitions, speaking together as one voice, and making sure those concerns were heard. Often when we're submitting legal petitions, for example, the deposit law petition, that's a collaboration between different NGOs and the civil society sector working together to speak as one voice. I think another level, and I'm trained as a social worker, so it's maybe a little close to my heart, is I think the COVID crisis emphasized that while there are a lot of community organizations, and it's very hard for beneficiaries in a state of crisis to navigate that whole system and find out where actually to go for help. And I think, Kavloved is a door for a lot of people to come in. While we work on labor rights, it's really so much more than that. A caregiver comes in, maybe we're the first person that she talks to about what's going on for her, within her state of employment. She's not getting paid, she doesn't have food, maybe there's a situation of sexual harassment or abuse going on, and she doesn't know where to go. And so I think Kavloved and other organizations that we work with likewise was doing a lot of referring back and forth. During the crisis, when we have a connection with a worker, we can say, okay, you have these needs, here's where you can go, here's the phone number, give them a call, they can help you out. And that's something we've been looking at in our work, how to make it easier to collaborate amongst NGOs so that beneficiaries can get help. And we looked at maybe even for caregivers developing an app that's organized by partners that we work with and we know can help them with different issues, so that if they're at home and they're having problems and they can't come in, they could find themselves links to other NGOs so that they can get the help that they need. And I think that's a way of also fostering collaboration between different organizations to meet what are often very complex needs for people in crisis.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we very much are supporting this collaboration and also providing a platform here in the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. I just want to mention two things. On the one hand, there is sometimes also among civil society competition over resources. So there's also conflict. And secondly, what we see is also sometimes a professionalization of non-profit organizations. And that sometimes goes hand in hand with the exclusion of volunteers from more formalized organizations. And on the other hand, you have, like what Daniella was presenting us, an increase in this less formalized, more neighborhood-based volunteering organizations. And also in this process, of course, there is tension and conflict involved.
Okay, thank you. We do have time for, I think, one last question. And I do want to ask you, we have a new government here in Israel. It's called the Change Government, but we shall see how it will change and if it will change. And if you were to give it one recommendation, or if there is one thing you would expect from this government in relation to the relations between civil society and the state during crisis or for the next crisis, what would it be?
I hope that somebody else answer this question. I think the relation between NGOs and the states, it's difficult. And when we talk about Arab community, it's not clearly over the time. All the time we work with the ministries which involved or are part of something like health ministry or education ministry or something to build new models. It's really not easy to bring our model to the ministries and that they take it and support it and give us the fund for. I hope that it will be changed. The Corona crisis describe or make it bold that the Arab community have the potential human resource to make change in this in Israel, in the community, in the Israel community, Arab and Jewish. And I hope that now with the new government, we have a new area. I hope, really, I not believe, but all the time I think about changing the relation between the Arab community and the state. But you see, and everyone saw what happened 1 month ago. It's not easy, really. But we are how to say, we are bereit. We are مخانين.
Ready. Yeah.
Ready. Oh, sorry. Sometimes you have that. We are ready for this step. I hope.
Thank you.
Maybe I'm a bit abstract. That makes it easier. Coming back to the term of resilience, I hope that this government will think about long-term resilience instead of favoring short-term returns, instead of prioritizing now economic growth over public goods and well-being. Just to have this in mind, that would help.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think along those lines, I mean, first of all, I'd just like to say that there are ways that our collaboration with the state has been quite fruitful and changes have been made, which is really a positive step. And I would say things that we would push for probably with any government, but especially at this point, I would say is increased transparency about enforcement issues. What steps are being taken? What are the results? How is this really making changes in work accidents, for example? You know, is this really resulting in fewer work accidents? And can we understand why? And a more systematic approach to enforcement, which makes it more clear how civil society organizations can fit into that and really make a change at a more systematic level versus getting stuck in, you know, one complaint after another, kind of lost in the weeds of it. I would say that's been our focus.
Thank you.
And I think the two words that were the most prominent in this panel were systematic and resilience, which I think is something to say. And Steffen, I enforce and support what you said, and this perspective of really thinking of a more holistic view, which also includes interdepartmental work. And I'd hope to see the education ministry and departments in our different municipalities and areas working with the sustainability and welfare and labor. And I think that once these conversations start to happen more frequently, we can create hopefully new solutions that are more long-term, and then we won't need to, we will be more prepared for the next, whatever else comes.
Okay. Abir, would you want to say anything?
I'm not sure actually what I would say to the government. It's just all still very complicated. I really want to be hopeful and just give it a chance. And if, you know, I believe in wishes, which I don't, but if I do, then I will just wish for it to have its name and really bring change, because we're all exhausted. But the path is very long. It requires from all of us, and especially civil society organizations, to prove more and maybe work more to be, you know, exposed. I would say I would expect them, all ministers, not only the prime minister, perhaps to really understand the people rather than just come and preach to us, because they're part of the, you know, the society. So I would expect something like that. Whether it will happen or not, we will see. But I believe we're all want to be hopeful, so crossing fingers.
Okay, we'll all join you in crossing fingers. Thank you, Abir. I think we're running out of time, and I do want to thank all of you for being here with us, and especially to our presenters, Ahmad, Sara, Steffen, and Daniella, and Abir also. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us. It was very interesting, and also for dealing with not at all easy questions which were asked here. And I do hope this will open the discussion and the conversation for the next panels that you will have on this occasion. And thank you very much all for being here with us.
Thank you, Michal, also for being such a wonderful moderator on our first round table. I'm impressed how this all worked together so nicely and we get so many different perspectives. We will take a short break. Normally we would serve you coffee if we wouldn't be in a virtual world. So now you have to make your own coffee. And we will convene at 6 Haifa time and start off our first panel that will introduce us or take us to 4 different places, to Brazil, again to Israel, to Great Britain, and to South Sudan. So I'm very much looking forward to this. This will be the first panel of the conference. I'm going to post the conference program again, so you can get familiar with this, and we convene here at 6 o'clock Haifa time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.